green light. Thank you. Can you hear me now? Oh, you gotta love technology, don't you? Gee whiz. Hey, I've always wanted to do that because if you've ever known the late Robin Williams, he was a journalist, and he was in that movie. Can you hear me? He'll turn it up. Robin Williams was in a movie called Good Morning Vietnam. And everybody that might be 40 and under may not know anything I'm talking about here. But that movie came out in 1987, and I've always wanted to be able to do that. Good morning. Good morning, Gracepoint. How's that? So anyhow, as you can see, this is not Pastor Jim up here today. He's got a little more hair on top than I do. And he's wanted me to fill in this morning at the pulpit here. He just needs some much needed rest, and he'll be back with us real soon. But anyhow, he wanted me to fill in today. So I said I'd be glad to. And I just was thinking about what I wanted to talk about. And then I came up with, I enjoyed the book of Ecclesiastes. Now, it took me about 2 months to be able to say that word, Ecclesiastes. And I'm so proud of myself because that's the longest word I know how to pronounce. But Ecclesiastes, anybody know what that means? It means a participant in an assembly of citizens. And that's what I want to talk about today to you all. The book of Ecclesiastes was first introduced to me in Brother Earl Porter's Bible study many years ago. And it just intrigued me how that book was put together. And that's why lately I've came back to look at the book again. And I want to share with you some stuff that was that I had picked up while I read the book. And the book of Ecclesiastes is to show mankind that we should live godly lives and have a joyful life. Though we live in a world that wants us to stray away from God and his divine benefits. And Solomon had to deal with that. And the farther we drift away from God, from day to day, or month to month, year to year, it just leads to more frustration and confusion in our life to come. And from a human perspective, there's 3 of the wisest men in history that I know of that's in the Bible. That is probably the top 3 teachers that we have. And the first one would be Jesus Christ himself. And then you can put Apostle Paul next, and then King Solomon. He was known to be the wisest man on earth at that time. Those are the 3 wisest men that I know that's in the book here. So we know Solomon, he had experienced a lot of vast wealth, if you've read the book. He had great possessions, beautiful palaces that he had built, tremendous wisdom. And being a king over all the land that they had, and he was just being smarter than anyone else in the entire world at that time. And yet, he was confused and frustrated. The theme of the book of Ecclesiastes comes from the very first chapter, verse 2. And it says, "Vanity of vanities, saith the preacher. Vanity of vanities, all is vanity. There we see life is meaningless. It's an emptiness that you feel where you're going through life. And it's that way unless God is acknowledged in your life. And that's what he was trying to find out. And unfortunately, he had to find it out the hard way, like most of us do. But anyhow, Solomon, he had looked everywhere for the meaning of life. And he found out that the world had no answers. And it still does not have answers for us. But he still persisted in trying to find out. So my question to you is, what's our meaning in life? What is our purpose here on earth? And that's what I want to share with you a little bit this morning. I thought it was interesting that if you look at God's Word, they put the book of Ecclesiastes right smack in the middle of that book. I mean, it's right in the middle. And I think that's interesting because I think it relates to our life cycle. Most of us are midway or in the middle of our life here on earth. Some more, some a little less, but you're in the middle of your life right now. And you've seen and you've experienced all the world that and what's been given to you. And there's some comfort in that. Some more than others. But then there's this other path that we usually try to find too. And that is that, what's our meaning for life? And we have in front of us now, we can see a godly life that's presented to us. Most of us anyhow. That we can live. We can live if we choose to live it. To follow Jesus Christ. And to have this eternal security one day. Forever, everlasting. And the writer of this book, we know, was King Solomon. And he was the son of David. We know that. And he was penned being the wisest man on earth at that time. This book of Ecclesiastes, though, it explores the purpose of life. That's what it does. And it goes through life in a series of questions and conclusions. And I think that's what aroused my desire to read it, because it talks about life. We know that Solomon, he talks about some of the greatest accomplishments he had done in his lifetime. We know he was a cherished son of David, and he was the anointed king of Israel. But he had a visionary architect into him also. And here in this book is the voice of wisdom and experience that if you're willing to listen to it, and it will speak directly to you and hopefully renew and recreate in your heart possibly a new joy that you might have lost in the years of coming here. And it's just it's a book of positives and negatives, and it's how you want to apply it to your life. A couple years ago, there was a survey that was taken that asked about 8,000 students in 48 colleges what they considered was very important to them. And in this study, conducted by the scientists and the scholars at Johns Hopkins University, reported that 16% of the students answered making a lot of money. And you would think that would have been the top priority. But only 16% had said making a lot of money. But a staggering 75% of them had said their first goal was finding a purpose and meaning in life. And I can see that today in the kids, the younger generation. Maybe this is why we look around at too many of the young people, expecting to see joy in them and energy, humor. But a lot of times you just find instead substance abuse and depression and suicide. You know, it just goes that way. It seems like you see it every day. So here in Ecclesiastes, within the history of the church, there has been two basic views about this book of Ecclesiastes. One view is some describe the contents negative in the book, being pessimistic, cynical, agnostic. Shows a picture of a man that's in doubt. He's wandered away from God and he's wanting to know what is the meaning of life. This would be the negative part. And then you have the other view, the second view. You see the view where many interpret this book as positive. A man that has come to faith, but he's also a realist. A man who sees that he can't simply get his whole life together and he needs help. So this book centers on basically 6 ideas. 3 negative and 3 positive. The 3 negative ideas are: 1, it says all is vanity. Everything's meaningless. Everything's just empty. The second negative idea is man's limited. And then the third one is God is hidden. He is hidden in his life. But then we have the 3 positive ideas. And the 3 positive ideas is, for number 1, fear God. You reverence God whenever you can. Fear God. The second positive thing you can get out of this book is enjoy life. We're only here for a short time, so you need to enjoy it as much as you can and what God's created here. And then the third thing is use wisdom properly. So these ideas are all scattered throughout these 12 chapters in this book. And the one that really stands out to me the most is especially in chapter 3, in the first 8 verses of the. And he talks there in that chapter 3 of the first 8 verses. He mentions 28 statements within those 8 verses. 14 of them are negative and 14 of them are positive. And you know some of them are like a time to be born and a time to die. A time to weep, a time to laugh. A time to love and a time to hate. And then we have a time of war and maybe a time of peace. Those are just some of them. But what it comes down to is life certainly does not have meaning because we have to acknowledge God. Because life does have meaning when we do acknowledge God. And why do we do that? Because he created it. He created everything. And he uses it to accomplish his purpose. Paul tells us this very thing in Romans 8:28. You know it well. And we know that all things work together for good to them that love God, to them who are called according to his purpose. That's our assurance and our promise from God. And so this study is about meaning in our life. King Solomon, successful as he was, unbelievably wealthy, surrounded by great men around him. He has beautiful wives and concubines. He had 300 wives, 600 concubines. I don't know if that was a blessing or a curse. But anyhow, he was blessed. He was exceedingly blessed by God. Solomon still felt, though, that most people, what they try to do today is search for today, what is the meaning of life? And he was still having a hard time understanding what that was. So we know Solomon wrote 3 books in this Bible of ours. And the first one he wrote was the Song of Solomon. And this represented him as a young king, energetic, full of zeal of God. And you can find that in 1 Kings 4, verse 32, where he says, "And he spake 3,000 proverbs, and his songs were 1,005 songs." This is the wisdom that he was given. And he spoke these, and of those 1,005 songs that he had wrote, this one, the Song of Solomon, this was his love song about his passionate romance to a young farm girl, Lebanese girl, that was early in his life, that later turned queen. And that was one of his loveliest songs that he had done. And then later on, he wrote the second book, and that's the book of Proverbs. Now this book, it represented Solomon's maturity, his mature years as a king there. And it showed 3 things. It showed the height of his wisdom. He was at his top. He had very, very much scientific knowledge. He had knowledge of science that nobody at that time had even understood what was going on. And the book tells you that. And then he talks about his kingly statue there. And then the third book is the book of Ecclesiastes. And he wrote this book that represented his sunset years. We call it the senior years. He's in his latter stages of life. And he's looking back at his life. And he's trying to summarize all that he had experienced in his life. And yet, somewhere along the way, in this senior years of his life, he's setting out to try to find out what is the meaning of life. And The book of Ecclesiastes, it's a roadmap of his quest, is what it is. And it's a testament to his search for a meaning, is what he's trying to do. And it's seen through the eyes of the most powerful and influential and educated man in the world at that time. What we know about Solomon is, we know Solomon was the king of Israel. And at the time of his birth to David and Bathsheba, the Lord gave him a special name. And that name was Jedediah. And Jedediah, it means beloved of the Lord. Solomon became king at a very young age. 1 Kings, I might be second. Is it 1 Kings 3:7 I gave you? Yeah. And now, O Lord, my God, thou hast made thy servant king instead of David, my father, and I am but a little child, and I know not how to go in or to come in. There you see him as a very young child, that God has already made him the king of Israel. I don't know how old that was, but it was quite young. And then God had asked this newly crowned Solomon, I want you to make a request of what you would like to have to be able to rule the people of Israel. So he comes and when he comes to 1 Kings 3:9, it says, give therefore thy servant an understanding heart, and to judge the people, that I may discern between good and bad. For who is able to judge this thy so great a people? He knew he had a big task ahead of him. And he asked for two things. He asked for wisdom to judge the people and to have an understanding heart. So he chose the gift of wisdom. And this wisdom was granted in 1 Kings 3, verses 11 and 12. And God said unto him, because thou hast asked this thing, and hast not asked for thyself long life, neither hast asked riches for thyself, nor hast asked the life of thine enemies. He didn't want those at first. He had asked for thyself understanding to discern judgment. Solomon enjoyed peacefully for approximately 40 years of no war, just peace. And that's why he was given the opportunity and the task of building the temple in Jerusalem, because David was not able to do that. And we know his people loved him. His crowning achievement was building that magnificent, beautiful Jerusalem temple. The nation of Israel had reached its golden age. They had possessed more land than any time in history at that time. They were on the pinnacle of the world. And rulers from all over, including the Queen of Sheba, even paid homage to him. They all did. So what I'm trying to say is, wouldn't you think Solomon could live happily ever after all that? He's been given wisdom to discern. He has an understanding heart. We understand that from the two women that wanted to say they wanted this baby. But it wasn't to be. It was not to be. Solomon's vast wealth and his fame and his sensual appetites that just tainted his special standing with God as the days went on and the years went on. And sometimes wealth and power and pleasure can be dangerous even to the wisest man. They can abuse it too. And Solomon did a good job of it. So this drifting came slowly to Solomon. Here he had a zeal for God, and he wanted to do everything he could for his people. And then he's drifting away slowly. Deceptions begin to slip in. And further, he moves from God, the creator of all this, everything. The greater became his emptiness and his frustration and his confusion. He's trying to find what is the meaning of life. John Wooden once said, "It's what you learn after you know it all that really counts." And that is a great quote. In the first 2 chapters of this book of Ecclesiastes, we find that he pursues the ultimate meaning in wisdom, in joy of companionship, material possessions, and of course his works that he had done. And after all that, unfortunately, none of those pursuits meant anything to him in life. So if we go into chapter 1 of this book, Solomon begins and ends this book with these words, "Vanity of vanities, saith the preacher. Vanity of vanities, all is vanity." Now in that verse there, Solomon calls himself preacher. And that means basically, as we all know, because I think that's where we got our word, preacher, is one who addresses an assembly. He uses that pen name 7 times in the book as a preacher. He also acknowledges as the son of David and also as the king of Jerusalem. And while Solomon is certainly the speaker in the book, he's nowhere actually identified as the author of the book. But nevertheless, both Jewish and Christians view him as the author of that book. I personally do too. Some say it was a prophet that had wrote the book for him. They also say that maybe one of his sons had wrote it for him. Not Rehoboam, but some of the less known boys that he had. But I have to lean towards, I think he actually wrote the book. And he's the author of the book. Because his body language, his footprints are all over the verses. You can feel him talking in that book. So in verse 2, it just talks about vanity is a key word here. Verse 2 was vanities of vanities, saith the preacher. Vanities of vanities, all is vanity. That's the key word in the whole book. This word vanity is used more than 30 times in those 12 chapters. And Solomon uses that word. He's referring to this emptiness that he had in his life. And in this case, he talks about it as a vapor that only lasts for a moment before it quickly vanishes. And it just leaves nothing behind. Verse 3 says, What profit a man of all his labor which he taketh under the sun? Now this verse implies answer to the question, is there no profit for a man in his work? We see here Solomon's negativity there. And by the way, negativity is very contagious if you allow it, and it can be corrosive. Sometimes it can be good, but most of the time it's not good. And as a plumber, retired plumber, water is one example of that. Water, a positive thing about water is you have to have water to sustain life. It's a very important commodity to have in life, or you don't survive. But then you can take water, and if it's not under control, it can be very corrosive. It can be very, very damaging. So it has a negative and it has a positive to it. But Solomon's negativity there comes from his disconnect from God there at the time too. That taketh under the sun means what is observable. He talks about everything under the sun, or taketh under the sun. He's looking at that. He's observing everything that is under the sun. And that's what we see. But the problem was he was looking at everything under the sun. And he wasn't looking what was behind the sun, because the sun was the one that created everything. And that was where his big hang-up was. And I think we have the same problem. We take God out of our lives sometimes, and it just spirals downward. And you wonder why it's going on. But now, Solomon, he's just saying here, life is utterly, absolutely, and totally meaningless. It has no value or profit. Solomon, he spent 40 years of his life on the top of history only to find out that it's empty at the top. And it's empty at the bottom also. So you have to find a balance there. Dreams come true. Not free sometimes, but part of that price is realizing that one more time that difficult joy has escaped our grip sometimes. Remember that second thing I said about a positive idea? We are to enjoy life. Life that gives us. Enjoy every day, because we're not guaranteed another day here. I think of some of the women that are in the church right now, they're dealing with a great difficulty of fighting cancer right now. And you have to think what they're thinking. You just have to lean on the Lord. That's what you have to do. You have to trust in the Lord. So anyhow, one generation passeth away, and another generation cometh, but the earth abideth forever. That's verse 4. One generation, it passeth away, and the other generation cometh, but the earth abideth forever. So that verse is just saying we go through life. We push ourselves towards some goal in life that we're shooting for. We're trying to reach that goal. And then we discover that we might as well have run a marathon on a treadmill or something. You just don't feel like you're getting anywhere. So we're right back to where we started again. But Solomon understood this bleak despair that follows that realization. Because then he goes back to that verse 3 again. He says, what profit hath a man of all his labor which he taketh under the sun? And that term, under the sun, comes up 29 times in that book. And that actually implies an earthbound view of things. It's just you're observing the earthbound view of things, under the sun. So remember, he had drifted away from the Lord over the years. And he just let the world take over in his involvement. And with all that wealth, all those wives, and all the world before him, there was just nothing left in the world to give him satisfaction. Or he still couldn't find it anyhow. So, in verse 4, Solomon, he views, his view there is gloomy. And he returns often to the subject of death. He uses it at the pinnacle of life, but he seems like his spirits have sort of withered away. And when life is built without a spiritual foundation, folks, death is a killer on the prowl. You can accept death two ways. You can accept it in faith, like we do, most of us, or you can face it in fear. And a lot of the lost and the unsaved, that's how they face death. They face it in fear. Do I have verse 5 up there? The sun also rises, and the sun goeth down, and hasteth to his place where he arose. There you see the sun also rises. There he's speaking of the silent, the uncaring machine that life and nature can appear to be. The sun doesn't slow down. It does its thing every day. Comes up and goes down. Time can't be stopped. It's just how God created it. But death marches towards us like a conquering armies. We can run, but we can't hide. They're going to find us one day. But remember, Solomon's negativity shows here also. Because this comes from his disconnect from God again. It's where we see what's under the sun and never what, again, is behind it. We are just left empty. We can go on and on this book because it's really, like I said, it really intrigued me after I was introduced to it. Because it has so much meaning to life. But you just have to decide, are you going to go in life in a negative attitude, or are you going to look at it as a positive attitude? And then today, boy, we need that so much. It's just so much negativity out there anymore. You can't even turn on the news and it's 99% negative, and maybe you might get a positive something out of there. So anyhow, time is about done, and I had more to go through, but I think we'll stop there. And I just thank you again for your patience and your listening to me. We just want to serve the Lord when we can, and just acknowledge Him, because that's what our life's all about. We just have to enjoy life. So I appreciate, again, your patience. And looks like we got maybe 15, 18 minutes left before we have